Have you ever been in a room full of people where you felt psychologically alone and mentally drained? And it's not necessarily like you were shy or anxious or anything. It's more like this gut feeling where you know intuitively that within the first 10 seconds or so of meeting someone else, whether you guys are going to click. Because when you're with your closest group of friends, I mean the ones that you really truly connect with, all of a sudden your guard is down and you're the most talkative person in the room. And if that sounds familiar, you're probably an introvert. And to define what an introvert really is, it's someone who recharges their social battery by being alone. And in spending that quality time with yourself, you may start to develop certain hobbies and interests, which you may be doing in your own free time, which gives you a lot of joy and fulfillment, whether that is gaming, hiking, reading, or even cooking. And these activities itself may not be considered mainstream. And the mainstream things that a lot of people find fun, you may have a bit of FOMO about, until you yourself go out there and do the activity itself. And then you will quickly realize that it's not as fun as a lot of people hype it up to be. And you were probably more so the quiet kid in school. And you didn't really think much of it until someone points out, like, why are you so quiet? Are you okay? As if something is wrong with you. It's almost as if society has conditioned us into believing that being introverted isn't a good thing, when in reality, and in my opinion, it can actually be a very powerful tool if you know how to leverage it. And this collective shift in thinking didn't happen overnight. In fact, it was the rise in industrialization in America, which played a huge role in shaping our cultural preference for extroversion. And as societies moved from small rural communities into more corporate environments, being outgoing and making a strong first impression became more important than ever. And as this culture of personality surged, without realizing it, a lot of us were pushed into developing these extroverted traits, not just to fit in, but to outshine others in an increasingly competitive environment. But this is where I feel like it's becoming a bit of a problem, because a lot of us are led to believe that developing and adopting this extroverted persona somehow makes you a better person and more successful, when that's not simply the case. It's just what catches the eye. And you may have heard the saying that the world revolves around sales. And just as an example, I guess I am, in a sense, selling myself by articulating my thought processes through this camera. So there is an element of truth to that. But because of this hyper-focus in presentation, the deep introverted thinker who would have been highly valued in, say, Greek and Roman times back in the day, would now be overlooked, even vilified in comparison to the more social extroverted counterpart. And it's because nowadays societies place too much emphasis on the way you present yourself and not enough on substance and critical thinking. And this pressure forces people to act like salesmen, constantly trying to present themselves in this confident manner, despite not having the substance and the information to back their claims up in a lot of cases. Because if you're not playing the game that everybody else is playing, you know, fake it till you make it, and it's not about what you know, but who you know, and expanding your social circle and those connections, just so you can prove to others and signal to others that you have a worth, you may feel like you risk getting left behind. But the thing that we have to realize is that what I've just mentioned so far, it's an extrovert's game, and it's not suited for everybody. And this is especially evident in school, which in my opinion is primarily designed for extroverts. And the more I think about it, the more I realize how unnatural the school environment really is. Especially for someone who's more introverted like myself, who has that itch to just sink their teeth into certain projects that I personally deeply care about, and would much rather hang out with a handful of friends at a time. And this starts to make more sense when you consider how the typical school day is structured. Because think about it, right? In the morning, as you enter school and into a classroom, the classroom is bombarded by group discussions in which a teacher is encouraging everybody to engage in the subject, which you may deep down not really care about. And then you get questioned as to the reasons as to why you're so quiet on parents' evening. And even if you go to eat lunch in a canteen, you may find yourself squeezed next to just a bunch of random strangers with so much noise and constant chatter. And it can feel a bit overwhelming, with everyone talking over each other and competing for attention. And this leaves little room for actually enjoying your meal in peace and engaging in those meaningful conversations. It's almost as if the entire structure of the school day is designed to sap your energy, rather than actually stimulate it, which leaves you little room to think or create. And it's something that I have been thinking about recently, as to the reasons as to why I feel like my 20s and entering into my adulthood feels a lot easier than my high school days. And I know this is a bit of an unpopular opinion, and I do think it's because of the fact that now I'm out of the education system, I have complete autonomy on the way I want to live my life, and not conform to any rules set by others. And this newfound freedom has made me reflect on my experiences and feelings, where I would wonder what it would actually be like to be that popular kid. You know, the star player back in high school with six-pack abs, who seems to be getting invited to all the parties and seems to be getting all the attention from the opposite gender. And here I was with my close but loyal group of friends, who only spoke when I got spoken to, and thinking that my introversion was a curse. And it's easy to jump to the conclusion that the extroverted traits that a lot of people admire, like being charismatic, witty, and having an athletic build, is the key to be socially successful. And the ironic thing is, I am at a stage in my life where I do have a lot of these traits that I've mentioned, which has been quite evident based on what has been happening in my life. Because I did decide to spend a portion of my life focusing on this very thing. And I could probably get away with acting like an extroverted person, but I don't really do that because that's just not me. Instead, I would much rather prefer to focus my attention on being my true self and entering a state of flow. And you have probably experienced this feeling before, but never knew how to describe it. So entering a flow state usually happens when you're completely present, whether that's an activity or a hobby that you're fully engaged in 100%. And for some reason, hours pass by without you even noticing. And it's almost like you have an endless amount of energy to keep going, like a positive addiction. And you usually enter a state of flow because you genuinely enjoy the activity itself, rather than the rewards that actually come with it. And from the outside looking in, it may not appear flashy or interesting, like an extroverted person who looks to be having the time of his life in a party. And you may undervalue this part of yourself, because I certainly did by not pursuing those hobbies which I thought were not cool or mainstream. But these are the type of activities which are going to bring you the most fulfillment in life. And many times, this involves you doing a work and activity by yourself in your own free time. And this is probably confirmation on something that you probably already know, which is to work alone. Even though on paper, engaging in a group where you're able to brainstorm ideas and collaborate sounds like the superior option. But in practice, you end up limiting yourself, since most introverts are actually more productive when they're working alone, as solitude often fuels their creativity and innovation. And a lot of introverts have traits which are often overlooked, such as having that power of persistence, the tenacity to solve complex problems, and having that vision to avoid pitfalls which may trip other people up. And this may bring up an important question in your mind, which is, okay, should I actually focus my time on developing that extroverted side of myself? Or should I just double down on being my introverted self? And in my humble opinion, I would have to say do both. But there's a specific way in which I would go about it if I were to give advice to my younger self. And you may hear this advice being thrown around, such as just be more social, which in my opinion is a bit too vague, and it's not goal oriented with something that you yourself actually care about. Because to me, the idea of being more social just to be more social doesn't actually make any sense. It feels like I'm spinning my wheels. But instead, the way I went about it was by integrating developing my extroverted traits through a personal project, work, or a hobby that I personally truly care about. And just as an example, just by posting videos on this channel has encouraged me to open conversations with more people in real life, because in doing so gives me indirect access to another unique individual with their own life experiences, thought patterns, and belief systems. And I have found that in some cases, this can sometimes lead to certain deep connections, whether platonically or romantically, where this may have not have happened if neither party decided to open up and start that conversation. And you may be able to tell from this video that I am pretty articulate, and it's because I review this footage back so that I'm able to improve my speaking skills. And I try to pay attention to any slurs, hesitations, or generally the way I organize and articulate my thoughts. It's almost like going to the gym to build muscle, but instead I've incubated and almost leveled up my communication skills by doing these videos. That said, I do believe that it's important to honor your introverted side, as I do believe that there is a limit to how extroverted you can come across. And this goes into the whole thing of whether our introversion or extroversion is shaped by our biology or our environment. And in my opinion, I don't think you can completely change into a quote-unquote extrovert if you're naturally more of an introvert. In fact, there is this concept called the rubber band theory when it comes to our personalities, which explains this really well. So essentially, we're like rubber bands at rest, with the capability to stretch ourselves if we choose to do so, but only so much until we return back to our natural introverted state. And the stretching is usually limited by something called behavioral leakage, which is when our true introverted selves subtly reveal themselves through our body language. Whether that is something as small as ending a conversation a little sooner, or even turning away from eye contact when an extroverted person would have held that eye contact a little bit longer. And when this happens, the tension builds and you may feel like you need to recharge. And this is where you may feel the need to seek out a space where you're able to relax and revert back to your true introverted self. So all in all, I do think that it's important and in your best interest to develop these social skills, and not necessarily to become the most social person, but more so to open up the potential for deeper and meaningful connections, which is something that you're probably craving for. And remember that introversion isn't a curse, and just be mindful of those who try to project their own desires on how you should be living your life. Because we have to realize that the definition of living a fulfilling life is going to look different for everybody, based on their own personal brain chemistry and individual desires. I appreciate you watching the video, and if you're still interested, you can check out the videos that are popping up on screen right now.